Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Homes for story time, and we continue with the novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. We begin with Chapter 8, Mobilis Immobile. This forcible abduction, so roughly carried out, was accomplished with the rapidity of lightning. I shivered all over. Whom had we to deal with? No doubt some new sort of pirates who explored the sea in their own way. Hardly had the narrow panel closed upon me when I was enveloped in darkness, my eyes dazzled with the outer light, could distinguish nothing. I felt my naked feet cling to the rings of an iron ladder. Ned Land and Conseil firmly seized and followed me. At the bottom of the ladder a door opened and shut after us immediately with a bang. We were alone. Where, I could not say, hardly imagine. All was black, and such a dense black that after some minutes my eyes had not been able to discern even the faintest glimmer. Meanwhile, Ned Land, furious at these proceedings, gave free vent to his indignation. "Confound it!" he cried. "Here are people who come up to the Scotch for hospitality. They only just miss being cannibals. I should not be surprised at all, but I declare that they shall not eat me without my protesting." "Calm yourself, friend." "Ned, calm yourself," replied Conseil, quietly. "Do not cry out before you are hurt. We are not quite done for yet." "Not quite," sharply replied the Canadian, "but pretty near, all events. Things look black. Happily my bowie knife and I still have, and I can always see well enough to use it. The first of these pirates who lays a hand on me." "Do not excite yourself, Ned," I said to the harpooner, "and do not compromise us by useless violence. Who knows that they will not listen to us? Let us rather try to find out where we are." I groped about. In 5 steps I came upon an iron wall made of plates bolted together. Then, turning back, I struck against a wooden table, near which were ranged several tools. The boards of this prison were concealed under a thick mat of phorium, which deadened the noise of the feet. The bare walls revealed no trace of window or door. Conseil, going around the reverse way, met me, and we went back to the middle of the cabin, which measured about 20 feet by 10. As to its height, Ned Land, in spite of his own great height, could not measure it. Half an hour had already passed without our situation being bettered, when the dense darkness suddenly gave way to extreme light. Our prison was suddenly lighted. That is to say, it became filled with a luminous matter so strong that I could not bear it at first. In its whiteness and intensity I recognized that the electric light which played around the submarine boat like a magnificent phenomena of phosphorescence. After shutting my eyes involuntarily, I opened them and saw that the luminous agent came from a half globe, unpolished, placed in the roof of the cabin. "At last one can see," cried Ned Land, who, knife in hand, stood on the defensive. "Yes," said I, "but we are still in the dark about ourselves." "Let master have patience," said imperturbable Conseil. The sudden lighting of the cabin enabled me to examine it minutely. It only contained a table and 5 stools. The invisible door might be hermetically sealed. No noise was heard. All seemed dead in the interior of this boat. Did it move? Did it float on the surface or the ocean? Or did it dive into the depths? I could not guess. A noise of bolts was now heard. The door opened and 2 men appeared. One was short, very muscular, broad-shouldered, with robust limbs, strong head, and an abundance of black hair, and a thick mustache. A quick, penetrating look, and the vivacity which characteristics the population of southern France. The second stranger merits a more detailed description. A disciple of Gratiolet or Ingle would have read his face like a book. I made out his prevailing qualities directly. Self-confidence, because his head was well set on his shoulders, and his black eyes looked around with cold assurance. Calmness, for his skin, rather pale, showed his coolness of blood. Energy, evinced by the rapid contraction of his lofty brows, and courage, because his deep breathing noted great, powerful lungs. Whether this person was 35 or 50 years of age, I could not say. He was tall, had a large forehead, straight nose, a clearly cut mouth, beautiful teeth, and with fine taper hands, indicative of a highly nervous temperament. This man was certainly the most admirable specimen I had ever met. One particular feature was his eyes, rather far from each other, and which could take in nearly a quarter of the horizon at once. This faculty, I verified it later, gave him a range of vision far superior to Ned Land's. When this stranger fixed upon an object, his eyebrows met. His large eyelids closed around, so to contract the range of his vision, and he looked as if he magnified the objects lessened by distance, as if he pierced those sheets of water so opaque to our eyes, and as if he read the very depths of the sea. The two strangers, with caps made from fur of sea otter and shod with sea boots of sealskin, were dressed in clothes of a particular texture, which allowed free movement of the limbs. The taller of the two, evidently the chief on board, examined us with great attention. Without saying a word, then turning to his companion, talked with him in an unknown tongue. It was sonorous, harmonious, and flexible in dialect, the vowels seeming to admit of very varied accentuation. The other replied by shaking his head, and added 2 or 3 perfectly incomprehensible words. Then he seemed to question me by look. I replied in good French that I did not know his language, but he seemed not to understand me, and my situation became more embarrassing. If master were to tell our story, said Conseil, perhaps these gentlemen may understand some words. I began to tell our adventures, articulating each syllable clearly, and without omitting one single detail. I announced our names and rank, introducing in person Professor Aronnax, his servant Conseil, and Mr. Ned Land, the harpooner. The man with the soft, calm eyes listened to me quietly, even politely, and with extreme attention, but nothing in his countenance indicated that he had understood my story. When I finished, he said not a word. There remained one resource, to speak English. Perhaps they would know this almost universal language. I knew it as well as the German language, well enough to read it fluently, but not to speak it correctly. But anyhow, we must make ourselves understood. Go on in your turn, I said to the harpooner. Speak your best Anglo-Saxon, and try to do better than I. Ned did not beg off, and recommenced our story. To his great disgust, the harpooner did not seem to have made himself more intelligible than I had. Our visitors did not stir. They evidently understood neither the language of Argot nor of Faraday. Very much embarrassed, after having vainly exhausted our speaking resources, I knew not what part to take, when Conseil said, "If master will permit me, I will relate it in German." But in spite of the elegant terms and good accent of the narrator, the German language had no success. At last, nonplussed, I tried to remember my first lesson, and to narrate our adventures in Latin, but with no better success. This last attempt being of no avail, the two strangers exchanged some words in their unknown language and retired, the door shut. "It is an infamous shame," cried Ned Land, who broke out for the 20th time. "We speak to those rogues in French, English, German, and Latin, and not one of them has the politeness to answer." "Calm yourself," I said to the impetuous Ned. "Anger will do no good." "But do you see, Professor," replied our irascible companion, "that we shall absolutely die of hunger in this iron cage?" "Bah!" said Conseil philosophically. "We can hold out some time yet." "My friends," I said, "we must not despair. We have been worse off than this. Do me a favor to wait a little before forming an opinion upon the commander and the crew of his boat." "My opinion is formed," replied Ned Land sharply. "They are rascals." "Good, and from what country?" "From the land of rogues." "My brave Ned, that country is not clearly indicated on the map of the world, but I admit that the nationality of the two strangers is hard to determine. Neither English, French, nor German, that is quite certain. However, I am inclined to think that the commander and his companion were born in the low latitudes. There is southern blood in them, but I cannot decide by their appearance whether they are Spaniards, Turks, Arabians, or Indians. As to their language, it is quite incomprehensible. There is the disadvantage of not knowing all languages, said Conseil, or the disadvantages of not having one universal language. As he said these words, the door opened. A steward entered. He brought us clothes, coats, trousers, made of a stuff I did not know. I hastened to dress myself, and my companions followed my example. During that time, the steward, dumb, perhaps deaf, had arranged the table and laid 3 plates. This is something like, said Conseil. Bah, said rancorous harpooner. What do you suppose they eat here? Tortoise liver, fillet of shark, and beef sticks from hot dogs? We shall see, said Conseil. The dishes of belle metal were placed on the table, and we took our places. Undoubtedly, we had to do with civilized people, and had it not been for the electric light which flooded us, I could have fancied I was dining in a dining room of the Adelphi Hotel at Liverpool, or the Grand Hotel in Paris. I must say, however, that there was neither bread nor wine. The water was fresh and clear, but it was water, and did not suit Ned Land's taste. Amongst the dishes which were brought to us, I recognized several fishy, delicately dressed, but some, although excellent, I could not give an opinion. Neither could I tell what kingdom they belonged to, whether animal or vegetable. As to the dinner service, it was elegant and in perfect taste. Each utensil, spoon, fork, knife, plate, had a letter engraved on it, with a motto above it, of which this is in exact facsimile. The inscription was Mobilis Immobili, in, period. The letter N had no doubt the initial of the name of the enigmatical person who commanded at the bottom of the sea. Ned and Conseil did not reflect much. They devoured the food, and I did likewise. I was besides reassured as to our fate, and it seemed evident that our hosts would not let us die of want. However, everything has an end. Everything passes away, even the hunger of people who have not eaten for 15 hours. Our appetites satisfied, we felt overcome with sleep. Faith, I shall sleep well, said Conseil. So shall I, replied Ned Land. My 2 companions stretched themselves on the cabin carpet, and were soon sound asleep. For my part, too many thoughts crowded my brain, too many insoluble questions pressed upon me, too many fancies kept my eyes half open. Where were we? What strange power carried us on? I felt, or rather fancied I felt, the machine sinking down to the lowest beds of the sea. Dreadful nightmares beset me. I saw in these mysterious asylums the world of unknown animals, amongst which this submarine boat seemed to be of the same kind, living, moving, and formidable as they. Then my brain grew calmer, my imagination wandered into vague unconsciousness, and I soon fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 9. Ned Land's Tempers. How long we slept I do not know, but our sleep must have lasted long, for it rested us completely from our fatigues. I woke first. My companions had not moved, and were still stretched in their corner. Hardly roused from my somewhat hard couch, I felt my brain freed, my mind clear. I then began an attentive examination of our cell. Nothing was changed inside. The prison was still a prison. The prisoners. However, the steward during our sleep had cleared the table. I breathed with difficulty. The heavy air seemed to oppress my lungs. Although the cell was large, we had evidently consumed a great part of the oxygen that it contained. Indeed, each man consumes in 1 hour the oxygen contained in more than 176 pints of air, and this air, charged as then with a nearly equal quantity of carbonic acid, becomes unbreathable. It became necessary to renew the atmosphere of our prison, and no doubt the hole in the submarine boat that gave rise to the question in my mind: how would the commander of this floating dwelling place proceed? Would he obtain air by chemical means, in getting by heat and oxygen contained in chlorate of potash, and in absorbing carbonic acid by caustic potash, or a more convenient, economical, and consequently more probable alternative? Would he be satisfied to rise and take breath at the surface of the water, like a cetacean would, and so renew for 24 hours the atmosphere provision? In fact, I was already obliged to increase my respirations to eke out of this cell the little oxygen it contained. Then suddenly I was refreshed by a current of pure air and perfumed with saline emanations. It was an invigorating sea breeze, charged with iodine. I opened my mouth wide, and my lungs saturated themselves with fresh particles. At the same time, I felt the boat rolling. The iron-plated monster had evidently just risen to the surface of the ocean to breathe, after the fashion of whales. I found out from the mode of ventilating the boat. When I had inhaled this fresh air freely, I sought the conduit pipe, which conveyed it to the beneficial whiff, and I was not long in finding it. Above the door was a ventilator, through which volumes of fresh air renewed an impoverished atmosphere of the cell. I was making my observations when Ned and Conseil awoke almost at the same time, under the influence of this reviving air. They rubbed their eyes, stretched themselves, and were on their feet in an instant. "Did master sleep well?" said Conseil, with his usual politeness. "Very well, my brave boy. And you, Mr. Land?" "Soundly, Professor, but I don't know if I am right or not. There seems to be a sea breeze." A seaman could not be mistaken, and I told the Canadian all that had passed during his sleep. "Good," said he. "That accounts for those roarings we heard when the supposed narwhal sighted the Abraham Lincoln." "Quite so, Mr. Land. It was taking breath. Only, Monsieur Arnaud, I have no idea what o'clock it is, unless it is dinner time." "Dinner time, my good fellow? Say rather breakfast time, for we certainly have begun another day." "So," said Conseil, "we have slept 24 hours? "That is my opinion." "I will not contradict you," said Ned Land, "but dinner or breakfast the steward will be welcome, whichever he brings." "Master Land, we must conform to the rules on board. I suppose our appetites are in advance of the dinner hour." "That is just like you, friend Conseil," said Ned impatiently. "You are never out of temper, always calm. You would return thanks before grace and die of hunger rather than complain." Time was getting on, and we were fearfully hungry, and this time the steward did not appear. It was rather too long to leave us, if they really had good intentions towards us. Ned Land, tormented by the cravings of hunger, got still more angry, and notwithstanding his promise, I dreaded an explosion when he found himself with one of the crew. For 2 hours more Ned Land's temper increased. He cried, he shouted, but in vain. The walls were deaf. There was no sound to be heard from the boat. All was still as death. It did not move, for I should have felt the trembling motion of the hull under the influence of the screw. Plunged in the depths of the water, it belonged no longer to earth. This silence was dreadful. I felt terrified. Conseil was calm. Ned roared. Just then a noise was heard outside. Steps sounded on the metal flags. The locks were turned, the door opened, and the steward appeared. Before I could rush forward to stop him, the Canadian had thrown him down and held him by the throat. The steward was choking under the grip of the powerful hand. Conseil was already trying to unclasp the harpooner's hand from his half-suffocated victim, and I was going to fly to the rescue when suddenly I was nailed to the spot by hearing these words in French. "Be quiet, Master Land, and you, Professor, will you be so good as to listen to me?" Chapter 10. The Man of the Seas. It was the commander of the vessel who thus spoke. At these words Ned Land rose suddenly. The steward, nearly strangled, tottered out on a sign from his master. But such was the power of the commander on board, that not a gesture betrayed the resentment which this man must have felt towards the Canadian. Conseil, interested in spite of himself, I, stupefied, awaited in silence the result of this scene. The commander, leaning against the corner of the table with his arms folded, scanned us with profound attention. Did he hesitate to speak? Did he regret the words which he had just spoken in French? One might almost think so. After some moments of silence, which not one of us dreamed of breaking, "Gentlemen," said he, in a calm, penetrating voice, "I speak French, English, German, and Latin equally well. I could therefore have answered you at our first interview, but I wished to know you at first, then to reflect. The story told by each one, entirely agreeing in the main points, convinced me of your identity. I know now that chance has brought me before Monsieur Pierre Arnault, professor of natural history at the Museum of Paris, entrusted with the scientific mission abroad, conceal his servant, and Ned Land, of the Canadian origin, harpooner on board the frigate Abraham Lincoln of the Navy of the United States of America. I bowed assent. It was not a question that the commander put to me, therefore there was no answer to be made. The man expressed himself with perfect ease, without any assent. His sentences were well turned, his words clear, and his fluency of speech remarkable, yet I did not recognize in him the fellow countryman. He continued the conversation in these terms: "You have doubtless thought, sir, that I have delayed long in paying you this second visit. The reason is that, your identity recognized, I wish to weigh maturely what passed to act towards you. That is, what part to act towards you. I have hesitated much. Most annoying circumstances have brought you into the presence of a man who has broken all the ties of humanity. You have come to trouble my existence." "Unintentionally," said I. "Unintentionally?" replied the stranger, raising his voice a little. "Was it unintentionally that the Abraham Lincoln pursued me at all over the seas? Was it unintentionally that you took passage in this frigate? Was it unintentionally that your cannonballs rounded off the plating of my vessel? Was it unintentionally that Mr. Ned Land struck me with his harpoon?" I detected a restrained irritation in these words, but to these recriminations I had a very natural answer to make, and I made it. "Sir," said I, "no doubt you are ignorant of the discussions which have taken place concerning you in America and Europe. You do not know that divers accidents caused by collisions with your submarine machine have excited public feelings in the two continents. I omit the hypothesis without number by which it was sought to explain the inexplicable phenomena of which you alone possesses the secret, but you must understand that in pursuing you over the high seas of the Pacific, the Abraham Lincoln believed itself to be chasing some powerful sea monster of which it was necessary to rid the ocean at any price." A half smile curled the lips of the commander. Then, in a calmer tone, "Mr. Arnault," he replied, "dare you affirm that your frigate would not as soon have pursued and cannonaded a submarine boat as a monster?" This question embarrassed me, for certainly Captain Farragut might have not hesitated. He might have thought it his duty to destroy a contrivance of this kind, as he would a gigantic narwhal. "You understand then, sir," continued the stranger, "that I have the right to treat you as enemies." I answered nothing purposefully, for what good would it be to discuss such a proposition, when force could destroy the best arguments? "I have listened some time," continued the commander. "Nothing obliged me to show you hospitality. If you chose to separate myself from you, I should have no interest in seeing you again. I could place you upon the deck of this vessel, which has served you as a refuge. I could sink beneath the waters and forget that you had ever existed. Would not that be my right?" "It might be the right of a savage," I answered, "but not that of a civilized man." "Professor," replied the commander quickly, "I am not what you call a civilized man. I am done with society entirely, for reasons which I alone have the right of appreciating. I do not, therefore, obey the laws, and I desire you never to allude to them before me again." This was said plainly, a flash of anger and disdain handled in the eyes of the unknown, and I had a glimpse of a terrible past in the life of this man. Not only had he put himself beyond the pale of the human laws, but he had made himself independent of them, free in the strictest acceptation of the word, quite beyond their reach. Who, then, would dare to pursue him at the bottom of the sea, when on its surface he defied all attempts made against him? What vessel could resist the shock of his submarine monitor? What cuirass, however thick, could withstand the blows of his spur? No man could demand from him an account of his actions. God, if he believed in one, his conscience, if he had one, were the sole judges to whom he was answerable. These reflections crossed my mind rapidly, whilst the personage was silent, absorbed, as if wrapped up in himself. I regarded him with fear mingled with interest, as doubtless Oedipus regarded the Sphinx. After rather a long silence, the commander resumed conversation. "I have hesitated," said he, "but I have thought that my interest might be reconciled with the pity to which every human being has the right. You will remain on board my vessel, since fate has cast you there. You will be free, and in exchange for this liberty, I shall only impose one single condition. Your word of honor to submit to it will suffice." "Speak, sir," I answered. "I suppose this condition is one which a man of honor may accept?" "Yes, sir, it is this. It is possible that certain events unforeseen may oblige me to consign you to your cabins for some hours, or some days, as the case may be. As I desire never to use violence, I expect from you more than all the others, a passive obedience. In thus acting, I take all responsibility. I acquit you entirely, for I make it an impossibility for you to see what ought to be seen. Do you accept this condition?" Then things took place on board which, to say the least, were singular, and which ought to be seen by people who were not placed beyond the pale of social laws. Amongst the surprises which the future was preparing for me, this might be the least. "We accept," I answered. "Only I will ask your permission, sir, to address one question to you. One only. Speak, sir. You said that we should be free on board. Entirely. I ask you then, what you mean by this liberty? Just the liberty to go, to come, to see, to observe, even all that passes here, save under rare circumstances, the liberty, in short, which we have enjoyed ourselves, my companions and I." It was evident that we did not understand one another. "Pardon me, sir," I resumed, "but this liberty is only what every prisoner has of pacing his prison. It cannot suffice us. It must suffice you, however. What? We must renounce for ever seeing our country, our friends, our relations again? Yes, sir, but to renounce the unendurable world's yoke, which men believe to be liberty. It is not, perhaps, so painful as you think." "Well," exclaimed Ned Land, "never will I give up my word of honor not to try to escape." "I did not ask you for your word of honor, Master Land," answered the commander coldly. "Sir," I replied, beginning to get angry in spite of myself, "you abuse your situation towards us. It is cruelty." "No, sir, it is clemency. You are my prisoners of war. I keep you when I could. By a word, plunged you into the depths of the ocean. You attacked me. You came to surprise a secret which no man in the world must penetrate, the secret of my whole existence. And you think that I am going to send you back to that world which must know me? No more. Never. In retaining you, it is not you whom I guard, it is myself." These words indicated a resolution taken on the part of the commander, against which no arguments could prevail. "So, sir," I rejoined, "you give us simply the choice between life and death?" "Simply." "My friends," said I, to a question thus put, "there is nothing to answer, but no word of honor binds us to the master of this vessel." "None, sir," answered the unknown. Then, in a gentler tone, he continued, "Now permit me to finish what I have to say to you. I know you, Mr. Arnault. You and your companions will not, perhaps, have so much to complain of in chance which has bound you to my fate. You will find amongst the books, which are my favorite to study, the work with which you have published on the depths of the sea. I have often read it. You have carried out your work as far as terrestrial science permitted you, but you do not know all. You have not seen all. Let me tell you then, Professor, that you will not regret the time passed on board this vessel. You are going to visit land of marvels. These words of the commander had a great effect upon me. I cannot deny it. My weak point was touched, and I forgot. For a moment, the contemplation of these sublime subjects was not worth the loss of liberty besides. Besides, I trusted to the future to decide this grave question, so I contented myself with saying, "By what name ought I to address you?" "Sir," replied the commander, "I am nothing to you but Captain Nemo, and you and your companions are nothing to me but the passengers of the Nautilus." Captain Nemo called. A steward appeared. The captain gave him orders in a strange language, which I did not understand. Then, turning towards the Canadian and Conseil, "A repast awaits you in your cabin," said he. "Be so good as to follow this man. And now, Monsieur Arnaud, our breakfast is ready. Permit me to lead the way." "I am at your service, Captain." I followed Captain Nemo, and as soon as I had passed through the door, I found myself in a kind of passage lighted by electricity, similar to the waist of a ship. After we had proceeded a dozen yards, a second door opened before me. I then entered a dining room, decorated and furnished in severe taste. High oaken sideboards, inlaid with ebony, stood at the extremities of the room, and upon their shelves glittered china, porcelain, and glass, inestimable value. The plate on the table sparkled in the rays with the luminous ceiling shed around it, while the light was tempered and softened by exquisite paintings. The center of the room was a table richly laid out. Captain Nemo indicated the place I was to occupy. The breakfast consisted of a certain number of dishes, contents of which were furnished by the sea alone, and I was ignorant of the nature and the mode of preparation of some of them. I acknowledged that they were good, but they had a peculiar flavor, which easily became accustomed to. These different aliments appeared to me to be rich in phosphorus, and I thought they must have a marine origin. Captain Nemo looked at me. I asked him no questions, but he guessed my thoughts, and answered of his own accord the questions which I was burning to address him. "The greater part of these dishes are unknown to you," he said. "However, you may partake of them without fear. They are wholesome and nourishing. For a long time I have renounced the food of the earth, and I am never ill now. My crew, who are all healthy, are all fed the same food. So," said I, "all these eatables are the product of the sea?" "Yes, Professor. The sea supplies all my wants." Sometimes I cast my nets in tow, and I draw them in ready to break. Sometimes I hunt in the midst of this element which appears to be inaccessible to man, and quarry the game which dwells in my submarine forests. My flocks, like those of Neptune's old shepherds, graze fearlessly in the immense prairies of the ocean. I have a vast property there, which I cultivate myself, and which is always sown by the hand of the Creator of all things. I can understand perfectly, sir, that your nets furnish excellent fish for your table. I can understand also that you hunt aquatic game in your submarine forests, but I cannot understand at all how a particle of meat, no matter how small, can figure in your bill of fare. This, which you believe to be meat, Professor, is nothing else than fillet of turtle. Here are also some dolphin's livers, which you can take to be ragout of pork. My cook is a clever fellow who excels in dressing these various products of the ocean. Taste all the dishes. Here is a preserve of halaturia, which a Malay would declare to be unrivaled in the world. Here is a cream of which the milk has been furnished by the Cetacea, and the sugar by the great Fucus of the North Sea. And lastly, permit me to offer you some preserve of anemones, which is equal to that of the most delicious fruits. I tasted more from curiosity than as a connoisseur, whilst my Captain Nemo enchanted me with his extraordinary stories. You like the sea, Captain? Yes, I love it. The sea is everything. It covers 7/10 of the terrestrial globe. It breathes, its breath is pure and healthy. It is an immense desert where a man is never lonely, for he feels life stirring on all sides. The sea is only the embodiment of a supernatural and wonderful existence. It is nothing but love and emotion. It is the living infinite, as one of your poets has said. In fact, Professor, nature manifests herself in it by her three kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, and animal. The sea is the vast reservoir of nature. The globe began with the sea, so to speak, and who knows of it will not end with it. In it is supreme tranquility. The sea does not belong to despots. Upon its surface, men can exercise unjust laws, fight, tear one another to pieces, and be carried away with terrestrial horrors. But at 30 feet below its level, their reign ceases, their influence is quenched, and their power disappears. Ah, sir, live in the bosom of the waters. There only is independence. There I recognize no masters. There I am free. Captain Nemo suddenly became silent in the midst of this enthusiasm, by which he was quite carried away. For a few moments he paced up and down, much agitated. Then he became more calm, regained his accustomed coldness of expression, and turning towards me, "Now, Professor," said he, "if you wish to go over the Nautilus, I am at your service." Captain Nemo rose. I followed him. A double door contrived at the back of the dining room opened, and I entered the room equal in dimensions to which I had just quitted. It was a liberty. High pieces of furniture, of black violet ebony, inlaid with brass, supported upon their wide shelves a great number of books, uniformly bound. They followed the shape of the room, terminating at the lower part of the divans, covered with brown leather, which were curved to afford the greatest comfort. Light, movable desks made to slide in and out at will allowed one to rest one's book while reading. In the center stood an immense table, covered with pamphlets, amongst which were some newspapers, already of old date. The electric light flooded everything. It was shed from 4 unpolished globes, half sunken into the volutes of the ceiling. I looked with real admiration at this room, so ingeniously fitted up, and I could scarcely believe my eyes. "Captain Nemo," said I to my host, who had just thrown himself on one of the divans, "this is a library which would do honor to more than one of the continental palaces, and I am absolutely astounded when I consider that it can follow you to the bottom of the seas. Where could one find a greater solitude or silence, Professor?" replied Captain Nemo. "Did your study in the museum afford you such perfect quiet?" "No, sir, and I must confess that it is a very poor one after yours. You must have 6,000 or 7,000 volumes here." 12,000, Mr. Arnaud. "These are the only ties which bind me to the earth. But I am done with the earth. I am done with the whole world on the day when the Nautilus plunged for the first time beneath the waters. That day I bought my last volumes, my last pamphlets, my last papers, and from that time I wish to think that men no longer exist or write. These books, Professor, are at your service besides, and you can make use of them freely." I thanked Captain Nemo and went up to the shelves of the library. Works on science, morals, literature abounded in every language, but I did not see one single work on political economy. That subject appeared to be strictly proscribed. Strange to say, all these books were irregularly arranged, in whatever language they were written, and this melody provided the captain of the Nautilus must have read indiscriminately the books which he took up by chance. "Sir," said I to the captain, "I thank you for having placed this library at my disposal. It contains treasures of science, and I shall profit by them." "This room is not only a library," said Captain Nemo. "It is also a smoking room." "A smoking room!" I cried. "Then one may smoke on board?" "Certainly." "Then, sir, I am forced to believe that you have kept a communication with Havana." "Not any," answered the captain, "except this cigar, Monsieur Arnaud, and, though it does not come from Havana, you will be pleased with it if you are a connoisseur." I took the cigar which was offered to me. Its shape recalled the London ones, but it seemed to be made of leaves of gold. I lighted it at a little brazier, which was supported upon an elegant bronze stem, and drew the first whiffs with the delight of a lover of smoking who has not smoked for 2 days. "It is excellent, but it is not tobacco." "No," answered the captain. "This tobacco comes neither from Havana nor from the East. It is a kind of seaweed, rich in nicotine, with which the sea provides me, but somewhat sparingly." And some admirable statues in marble and bronze, after the finest antique models, stood upon pedestals in the corners of this magnificent museum. Amazement, as the captain of the Nautilus had predicted, had already begun to take possession of me. "Professor," said this strange man, "you must excuse the unceremonious way in which I receive you, and the disorder of this room." "Sir," I answered, without seeking to know who you are, "I recognize you as an artist." "An amateur, nothing more, sir. Formerly I loved to recollect these beautiful works, created by the hand of man. I sought them greedily, and ferreted them out indefatigably, and I have been able to bring together some objects of great value. These are my last souvenirs of the world which is dead to me. In my eyes, your modern artists are already old. They have 2,000 or 3,000 years of existence. I confound them in my own mind. Masters have no age." "And these musicians," said I, pointing out some works of Weber, Rossini, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Meyerbeer, Herod, Wagner, Auber, Gounod, and a number of others, scattered over the large model piano organ which occupied one of the panels of the drawing room. "These musicians," replied Captain Nemo, "are the contemporaries of Orpheus, for in the memory of the dead all chronological differences are effaced. And I am dead, Professor, as much dead as those of your friends who are sleeping 6 feet under the earth." Captain Nemo was silent, and he seemed lost in a profound reverie. I contemplated him with deep interest, analyzing in silence the strange expression of his countenance. Leaning on his elbow against an angle of a costly mosaic table, he no longer saw me. He had forgotten my presence. I did not disturb his reverie, and continued my observation of the curiosities which enriched this drawing room. Under elegant glass cases, fixed by copper rivets, were classed and labeled the most precious productions of the sea which had ever been presented to the eye of a naturalist. My delight, as professor, may be conceived. The division containing the zoophytes presented the most curious specimens of the 2 groups of polypi and enchodermis. In the first group, the turbihores were gorgons arranged like a fan, soft sponges of Syria, Isis of the Moluccas, pinnatules of an admirable Virigolia of the Norwegian seas, variegated Umbellularia and Aculariae, a whole series of madrepores, which my master Milne Edwards has so cleverly classified, amongst which I remarked some wonderful flabulae, oculae of the island of Bourbon, the Neptune's car of the Antilles, superb varieties of corals, in short, every species of those curious polypi of which entire islands are formed, which will one day become continents, of the Indochermes, remarkable for their coating of spines, asterie, sea stars, Pantechirinae, Comityles, Astrophones, Inchae, Holoturi, etc., represented individually a complete collection of this group. A somewhat nervous conchliologist would certainly have fainted before the more numerous cases in which were classified the specimens of molluscs. It was a collection of inestimable value, which time fails me to describe minutely. Amongst these specimens I will quote from memory only the elegant royal hammerfish of the Indian Ocean, whose regular white spots stood out brightly on a red and brown ground, the imperial sponduli, bright-colored, bristling with spines, a rare specimen in the European museums. I am estimated its value at not less than 1,000 pounds. A common hammerfish of the seas of New Holland, which is only procured with difficulty, exotic Bucardia of Senegal, fragile white bivalve shells, which breath might shatter like a soap bubble, several varieties of Asphygium of Java, a kind of calcareous tube edged with leafy folds, and much debated by amateurs, a whole series of trochee, some a greenish yellow, found in the American seas, others a reddish brownish, natives of the Australian waters, others from the Gulf of Mexico, remarkable for their imbricated shell, Stellaria, found in the southern seas, and last, the rarest of all, the magnificent spur of New Zealand, and every description of delicate and fragile shells to which science has given appropriate names. Apart in separate compartments were spread out chapelets of pearls of greatest beauty, which reflected the electric light in little sparks of fire, pink pearls torn from the Pinna Marina of the Red Sea, green pearls of the haliotide iris, yellow, blue, black pearls, the curious productions of the divers of mollusks of every ocean, and certain mussels of the watercourses of the north, lastly, several specimens of inestimable value, which had been gathered from the rarest Pinnatandines. Some of these pearls were larger than pigeon's egg, and were worth as much and more than which the traveler Tavernier sold to the Shah of Persia for 3 millions, and surpassed the one in the possession of the Imam of Muscat, which had believed to be unrivaled in the world. Therefore, to estimate the value of this collection was simply impossible. Captain Nemo must have expended millions in the acquirement of these various specimens, and I was thinking what source he could have drawn from to have been able thus to gratify his fancy for collecting, when I was interrupted by these words. "You are examining my shells, Professor. Unquestionably, they must be interesting to a naturalist. But for me, they have a far greater charm, for I have collected them all with my own hand, and there is not a sea on the face of the globe which has escaped my research." "I understand, Captain, the delight of wandering about in the midst of such riches. You are one of those who have collected their treasures themselves. No museum in Europe possesses such a collection of the produce of the ocean. But if I exhaust all my admiration upon it, I shall have none left for the vessel which carries it. I do not wish to pry into your secrets, but I must confess that this Nautilus, with the motive power which it is confined within it, the contrivances which enable it to be worked, the powerful agent which propels it, all excite my curiosity to the highest pitch. I see suspended on the walls of this room instruments of whose use I am ignorant. You will find these same instruments in my own room, Professor, where I shall have much pleasure in explaining their use to you. But first come and inspect the cabin, which is set apart for your own use. You must see how you will be accommodated on board the Nautilus. I followed Captain Nemo, who, one by one of the doors opening from each panel of the drawing room, regained the waist. He conducted me towards the bow, and where I found not a cabin, but an elegant room, with a bed, dressing table, and several other pieces of furniture, I could only thank my host. Your room adjoins mine, said he, opening a door, and mine opens into the drawing room, and that we have just quitted. I entered the captain's room. It had a severe, almost monkish aspect. A small iron bedstead, a table, some articles of toilet, the whole lighted by the skylight. No comforts, the strictest of necessities only. Captain Nemo pointed to a seat. Be so good as to sit down, he said. I seated myself, and he began thus. And that, my friends, is all we have time for today. I hope you have enjoyed this exploration of a few of the rooms of the mysterious Nautilus submarine style kind of boat craft. I think we will learn much more in the coming chapters. This has been Indiana Homes for Storytime. Love to you all, and good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.